Hello. So this is my video presentation for my independent study paper. I did my study paper on the language barriers of international students. So basically, I chose to do this topic because I work in the international office and I deal with students that the English is not their first language, so sometimes it can be very difficult to understand what they're saying, especially if they're just getting here. So I did my whole research project on that, and I looked into some previous research, and I found three themes that seem to be very dominant in this type of research. It's the English language barrier, acculturation stress, I don't really know how to say that, I'm sorry, and social stressors. So basically, according to Lyon's study that the researcher did in 2015, the English language barrier is a lack of full fluency of American English, undermining the student's ability to communicate with peers and others, occasionally leading to miscommunication and misunderstanding, as well as the ability to form relationships. Acculturation stress was defined in Raw's 2016 study as the response by individuals to life events that stem from intercultural contact. Another researcher, Lakin Zygobsby, also found that students coming from collective cultural backgrounds experience low life satisfaction and higher acculturation stress compared to students from individualist communities. And then there were the common social stressors, which most people think of when they think of moving abroad. So you got cultural shock, cultural differences, and then the chance of isolation, basically cutting yourself off from Americans here, cutting yourself from other international students, just because you're not comfortable talking to them. So for this research paper, my research questions, there's two of them, were how impactful is the language barrier and other stressors for international students in higher education in regards to academics and social settings? And then the second question was, what were some coping strategies used to reduce these factors, and how much did these strategies actually work? So my methodology for this project was a focus group of 15 students. They were ranging from freshmen to juniors. I had 5 Nepalese students, 4 Taiwanese students, 3 Chinese students, 1 Egyptian, 1 Kuwaiti student, and 1 Saudi student. It took about 60 minutes. However, from the focus group, 45 minutes was really the content base, whereas the other part was me trying to explain myself, because these are people who some were not good with English. So it took 60 minutes, but 45 was more content based. It had 8 open-ended questions that allowed follow-up, and then it had a post-focus group demographic questionnaire. It was all anonymous. No names were mentioned. Some talked about their countries, but other than that, there was no real identifiers. It was recorded and transcribed, which helped me determine my results. So I found 3 themes: the negative impact, negative effect of language barrier on academics, the need for support for social stressors and acculturation stress, and then coping strategies. So within the negative effect of the language barrier on academics, there are various sub-themes. International student and faculty relationships, international student and domestic student relationships, and then assignments. So, for example, 46% of the participants feel as if faculty do not give the same attention to international students as they do domestic students. And then one Chinese student said, I do not feel comfortable going to a professor's office hours for 2 reasons. 1, most professors seem like they don't want to talk to a student who has difficulty with English, may get frustrated, and have questions. And then the other reason is because of the Chinese culture. You do what the teacher says and you ask no questions. So that quote basically supported the idea of the negative effect on student-faculty relationships, but it also supported the cultural differences and social stressors and how that has an effect on the U.S. academics world. And then in the regard of relationships with domestic students, a student said that as an international student, we do not like group work. Americans sometimes think we're dumb, but it's hard to prove them wrong with that language gap. So basically, these students don't work with Americans as much as they should. Usually, especially after the first semester, they schedule classes together. So when group work happens, they're capable of working, using the same language, getting through the class together, not having that English barrier as much as if they were by themselves in a class. However, the biggest issue with academics is the assignments. So the writing papers, the speaking for presentations, as well as exams. The time crunch for exams, some students need a little bit longer to understand what the question is asking because of the English language, and therefore sometimes they don't finish or they get a really bad grade, which can affect GPA, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then an example of the language barrier with assignments was I was so nervous to speak during class, and then when presentations happened, I was embarrassed because I wasn't capable of doing it smoothly. But then the more I do it, the more I know I'm getting better. So other main themes from this study included the need of support to reduce social stressors and acculturation stress. And so the need of support actually had some sub-themes, which included the lack of understanding of culture shock from U.S. citizens, and then they want more specific programming with international student services to acclimate them to the U.S. collegial world. For example, one student from Taiwan stated that, "I know that I would have culture shock coming to the U.S., but in my country, people help people from other countries adjust to our society. We don't look down on foreign people, but we welcome them. When I came over here, I thought it would be the same, but I think that is also another example of culture shock, isn't it?" So basically, she expected Americans to be as nice as her home people from her home country, and they're not so nice. Not everyone. There are some, and in the focus group, they do explain that yes, there are rude encounters, but there are also nice people who are willing to work with them and help them better their English. However, one student did say that it's the rude people that stick with them, and that's what can deter them from interacting with other Americans to improve their English, as well as just if someone's mean to you, you don't want to talk to other people like them. So if one American's mean to you, you feel less likely, like you don't want to talk to another American until you have a good experience with an American, and then things kind of even out. That's basically an example they kept telling me. The last theme that was found from this study was coping strategies. So they gave 3 very common coping strategies that kind of related very well with previous literature. So they gave you the strategies they gave were don't be shy and don't be afraid to speak English with Americans, and perhaps having some sort of support services either from the U.S. or from the university or from the community, which helps them engage more with Americans without the risk of having rude encounters. So one student actually said, "You have to talk to people. That is the only way you'll learn English, especially in a social setting, and how things are in America. I know there are mean people, but there are nice people too. I've had a few people willing to talk to me to learn about my country as well as much as I wanted to learn about theirs. So, talking to Americans or even just English speakers from other countries, the English varies differently from each country, but they get the same type of concepts. And then participating in programs on campus would help with their English. So in my results, I also included the results from the post demographic questionnaire. And in that questionnaire, it asked about GPA, it asked about how many years they studied English, what was their status in school, and if they participated in any ESL programs. And so out of the 15 students, I believe six went through an ESL program. And from the questionnaire, I found that the 6 people who attended ESL programs actually got a higher GPA than students who did not in their freshman year. So, as years go on and they're in the system longer, their English becomes better. And I also found that the juniors and sophomores, they get better GPAs as they become more familiar with the English language. So to answer my research questions, language barriers do have a tremendous negative impact on international students, which was expected from the previous literature. And then the best way YSU students coped with the language barrier is to just practice and get out of that comfort zone. Limitations in this study were obviously time and the time of year. So I had 12 weeks to produce this. IRB approval took a while, and then I had a very small sample I could choose from because most people go home during the summertime. Another limitation was, they said the IRB, and just another limitation was there were no seniors to really discuss the matter because they graduated, because it is summertime. And then directions for future research could be about doing a quantitative study on TOEFL and IELTS scores of incoming freshmen, and then their GPA. Another possible research idea would be to take the students that were freshmen in this study and ask them the same questions and how things have changed when they're senior, when they're about to graduate. So that concludes my presentation. I'm sorry I was all over the place. It was a great project, great interaction. I was pleased with what I was found, and then I really hope that more research could be done at YSU to help improve that language barrier. And that concludes my presentation. However, Dr. C, this part's for you. I just wanted to say thank you for everything you did, even because this is going to be my last presentation. You were a huge help during my whole master's program, and you helped me get through it. And I've made a semi-decision that I would like to go study a PhD program in communications somewhere down the road. I need to get a job first. But thank you for everything you do, and I hope to stay in touch.